Hi, everyone. Welcome today to our webinar. This is Beverly Craig, and we have two fantastic speakers, Nick and Angela from Revision Architecture in Pennsylvania. They're both very experienced in Passive House and especially in verification. So it should be a great webinar today. Nick, could you advance the slide, please? So I just wanted to mention if you're here and interested in Passive House, there's two other webinars, both free, that are coming up that may be of interest to you. First is a week from today, Thursday, May 28th, from 2 to 3, is about Cambridge Finch, which is a 98-unit new construction affordable housing project that is just about to open, so close. And this will be the first affordable multifamily that's certified passive in the state of Massachusetts. Nessie is sponsoring that webinar. It's a really great team that's going to be on that call. And then Passive House Massachusetts, sponsored by the Mass Save program, is going to have part 2 of this webinar series about lessons learned in Passive House. And specifically, it'll be David Salomon talking about common Passive House mistakes and how to avoid them. Obviously, it's best if we learn from other people's mistakes, because who wants to make them? So the more you can learn about problems that commonly happen and anticipate them, the easier Passive House projects are going to be. And I just want to first thank the Mass Save program and Passive House Mass for putting this on. Mass Save has a very generous incentive program in Massachusetts for new construction, multifamily, 5 units and above. If you haven't heard about this, if you actually certify to Passive House standards, it's $3,000 per unit. 500 of that comes at pre-certification and 2,500 at the final certification. There's also extremely generous planning money that's available. So when you're still really early to do a Passive House feasibility study, they provide 100% of the cost up to $5,000 for a feasibility study, and 75% of the energy modeling costs for Passive House modeling, which of course, I think many of us know that energy modeling can be useful even if you don't end up certifying. So really encourage any multifamily project that does qualify for these to take advantage, especially of the early planning money. And of course, we all know Passive House actual certification leads to much better outcomes as well. Next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to, I think, Angela, are you starting?
That's actually going to be me. This is Nick.
Okay, Nick. Nick's going to be kicking us off and talking a little bit about the CEUs for this.
Great. Thanks very much, Beverly. We are very pleased to be here today. Before we dive into the presentation, a quick note about CEUs. This session was originally approved by FIAS for 2.5 CPHC credits. However, that was in the before times when we could all meet in person. So this was originally going to be one large in-person session. It's been split into 2 remote sessions. So while we kind of iron out those CEUs for now, if you'd like to get those 2.5 CPHC credits, please plan to attend the second half of this presentation on June 16th at noon Eastern Time. Revision Zone David Salomon will be leading that one. Angela and I have gotten to sit through that one before, and it is also an excellent presentation. So please plan to tune in for that one as well. If we wind up working out anything in the interim for credit for this presentation standalone, we'll be sure to follow up with anyone who needs it. All right, so our presentation today is what to expect when you're expecting Passive House verification. Like many other things in life, it's not always entirely clear what you're getting yourself into when you commit to a Passive House project. Our goal today is to demystify what to expect once you start heading down that road. And specifically, our goal is to identify what happens during the construction and verification process of Passive House, especially those things that might not always be terribly clear to designers up front, the kind of things that don't necessarily jump out at you from the Passive House handbook. So as we start working through all of these, our first question to everyone is who's here? We'd like to understand how to spin some of the information we're going to be giving you and understand who we've got on the call. So I'm launching the poll. So that should be up on your screen now. Yep, I see the responses coming in. Very good. So your options here: architect, designer, building owner, developer, contractor, energy, environmental professional, etc., government employee, nonprofit employee. And we've got 80% of people voting. We'll give you another couple of seconds to get those in before we close it. And all right, let's close that out and I will share the results with everyone. So here's who we've got. About a third architects and designers, about a third general energy, environmental professional, etc. A few owners and developers, and a few other folks, and a smattering of contractors. All right, great. That's honestly a little more diverse than we were expecting today, but that's fantastic. I think we've got a little bit in here for everyone. So thanks for participating in that poll. All right, so you've told us a little about you. Here's a little about us. Angela and I are both from Revision Architecture. We're based in Philadelphia. Revision is a deep green architecture firm. We also perform sustainability consulting. We provide passive house verification services, and we're also involved with community engagement and a variety of research and training activities as well. Over 50% of our staff is passive house verified in one capacity or another. That's all of the blue boxes on your screen. You can see everyone who's got their certification. We also do Living Building Challenge projects. We do a lot of LEED work. We've done a number of sites projects, well projects, etc. So no matter the certification or the building type, we've done a significant amount of work across building types. I'm going to turn it over to Angela to go through our learning objectives for today.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so in terms of what to expect from today's presentation, we have a couple learning objectives. The first being, we hope that you will gain a better understanding of the multiple certifications that are actually nested within FIAS. Secondly, we're going to learn about the major technical requirements for each program. Next, we'll identify when and where each program is required and how to plan for them. And then lastly, we'll learn about the staff certification requirements for each program. So I think everyone is pretty familiar with the design principles of Passive House. When it comes to verifying that your project is meeting Passive House benchmarks, FIAS has developed different performance metrics around these principles. And today we'll outline how on-site Passive House verification helps confirm the performance metrics related to these principles are met. So before we dive into the specifics, let's just briefly talk about why verification is important. Verification is important because it provides project QA/QC. A verifier is a third-party team member. Having a third party is helpful because A, you get an objective standpoint, and B, it's also helpful to have someone who's not looking at the project every day get their eyes on things. It also validates design decisions and construction execution. It gives you metrics for what passing is. It verifies your performance goals, aka your Passive House benchmarks, are met, and it also verifies that the building is constructed and operating as intended. It confirms your actual construction matches everything the team is claiming is part of the project. We trust you designers and contractors, but you never know. And hopefully it ultimately helps promote higher quality and more successful buildings. So now Nick is going to get us started with the good stuff by outlining the sometimes implicit certifications we're dealing with when it comes to FIAS.
Thanks, Angela. Now, one of the questions we get probably most often from people working through FIAS certification for the first time involves the certification that they're going after. When you sign up for a Passive House project, you think to yourself, well, I'm going after one certification, right? Well, not always. In fact, FIAS has a number of certifications that may be required of your project, depending on the project type and some of the details. And this part of the presentation will run through exactly what those certifications are, when they're required, and what you need to be aware of for those other certifications as well. So as we head into that section, we're going to do a quick knowledge check. We'll put up another quick poll question. Which of these certifications is not required for any FIAS certifications? That is, for any FIAS project, you will never need to pursue which one of these particular certifications. Our options are EPA's Energy Star program, True Zero Waste, EPA's Indoor Air Quality Plus, EPA's WaterSense program, or the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home program. All right, we've got half of the people participating have voted so far. We'll wait to get a few more responses in. We'll see if we can tick that up to about 75%. We just need a couple more of you. I feel like I'm on PBS. You can do it. You can participate.
Yeah.
You can help us reach our goal. Get us to 75% voting. We did it. We did it. Thank you so much.
We should have the Jeopardy theme song behind this, yeah.
Yeah, okay, pretend our theme song is fading out. We'll send all of you the tote bags for your participation. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll close the poll. And here are your results. So the ayes have it in this particular case. The correct answer, True Zero Waste, was not required for any FIAS certifications. We had a smattering of people who thought the other ones might be the case, but WaterSense, as we'll see, is a bit of a tricky answer, but Zero Waste is probably the most correct answer. So, all right. That gives us kind of a baseline level of knowledge to work with, and I appreciate everybody's participation. All right. Now, all of those other programs that we had in that question are required in different degrees and for different reasons if you're pursuing FIAS certification. And here at Revision, we think of these like certification matryoshkas. One thing is required, which leads to another thing being required, which leads to another thing being required. So let's talk through how all of these various certifications nest together. So we'll start out by saying you're pursuing FIAS certification, and we'll talk first about smaller scale residential, up to 5-story residential. Well, if you're pursuing FIAS, you've also got to pursue Zero Energy Ready Home certification from the US Department of Energy. If you're pursuing Zero Energy Ready Home certification, you've also got to pursue EPA Indoor Air Plus certification. If you're pursuing that certification, you've also got to pursue Energy Star certification. And Energy Star certification requires a HERS rating on top of that. So signing up for one certification saying that you want Passive House certification from FIAS actually requires you to put up to 5 different labels on your residential project. Now, it's a little more straightforward for other FIAS projects if you're talking about larger multifamily construction or commercial projects. Now we're looking at EPA Indoor Air Plus. And beginning with projects permitted in 2021 or later, you'll be required to pursue Energy Star multifamily certification as well. So beginning in 2021, for the majority of FIAS projects, you'll be looking at least 3 and possibly 5 different certifications. Now, as we go through, we're going to focus on each one of these certifications in turn to talk through what it entails and what's required and what you really need to be aware of, especially on a designer and a constructor side. We'll start first at the bottom of the ladder with HERS. This is the certification a lot of other things are built upon. So what is HERS? HERS is the Home Energy Rating System. It's foundational to FEIS and many other energy efficiency programs, including Energy Star, Lead for Homes. They literally wrote the book on blower door testing. If you look up blower door standards, it comes from ResNet, the group that runs the HERS program. The HERS scale technically does not have any bounds, but it sets 0 as a net zero energy home. You could go negative if you produce more energy. And 100 is pegged right around the performance of the 2003-2006 IECC. Most existing homes are going to be around 120. Newer homes and passive house in particular, we typically see scores down around 30. So just to give you a sense of how that scale falls out. The HERS rating requires a HERS rater to be involved in the project. Typically, that's the person doing your FEIS rating or verification work. And HERS is used on single family, small multifamily, and some mid-rise multifamily projects as well. So how is HERS used? What do we do with it? Well, in the FEIS world, FEIS references the ResNet standards for unit sampling and blower door testing. So if you've got a multifamily project, we don't always necessarily need to test each individual unit. ResNet provides guidance about how you're allowed to sample. And it also provides the regulations around setting up and running your blower door tests. The actual HERS rating is required for Energy Star single family certification. Outside of that, HERS is also used for code compliance for IECC 2015 and above. It's used to secure a federally backed mortgage for energy efficiency improvements. You may see it used on general energy audits for home improvements. And some real estate MLS listings provide a slot for the HERS rating so that home buyers can compare apples to apples. That's unfortunately not nationwide, but it's a nice little bonus feature if you happen to live in the right geographic area. So we've mentioned at this point that HERS is required for some projects, but not all. So next, let's discuss, then do you need a HERS rating? We'll go through the rest of the slide without the ridiculous accent, but we will work through a delightful Venn diagram. So first we have the group of HERS ratings. If you're a FEIS single family project, you will always be required to get a HERS rating. If you're a FEIS multifamily project, you will sometimes be required to get a HERS rating. If your project has 4 units or fewer, or if your project has 3 stories or fewer, regardless of number of units, or if your project is 4 to 5 stories and 80% residential, you will be required to get a HERS rating. Those are all based on the Energy Star single family homes certification requirements, which require a HERS rating. Larger projects, 6+ story residential, 4 to 5 stories, if more, that is commercial space or shared space, and commercial projects are not required to get a HERS rating. So one of our first notes is that FEIS does not require multifamily verifiers to be HERS raters, but some projects will still need one. Now, as a designer, this is not something you need to be terribly concerned about. If you hire a verifier who's not also a HERS rater, it's going to be up to them to bring someone else onto the team to fulfill that role. This is just a caveat to note that you may have some additional people joining your project team. So this is something to discuss as you're looking around for a verifier. All right, so that's what we need to know about HERS. Let's move up the chain of command and talk about the Energy Star certification. What we're talking about here is Energy Star version 3 building certification. This is not just the stamp that you get on energy efficient monitors or refrigerators or anything like that. Those are components of this program, but we're talking about whole building certification. And all of the requirements that we're going to talk about right now apply to single family and small to mid-rise multifamily. To get Energy Star certification, the building has to complete a blower door test. This can be the same blower door test you use for FEIS certification, so no additional scope so far. It also requires an energy model. This is typically done in REM-Rate, which is the HERS, which is the software most common for HERS. There are a few other softwares that can do it, but this is not your WFI model. This is not an ASHRAE 90.1 energy model. Requires a HERS certified professional to sign off on the documentation, and they've got to complete a construction checklist, which is generally less stringent than the passive house construction details that are worked into most projects. So really the biggest thing here is getting that HERS rating and the energy model built up. That's usually the additional scope that goes along with that. And again, beginning in 2021, multifamily will also be required to go after Energy Star certification. Now, those larger projects may perform an energy model, and their energy model may be an ASHRAE 90.1 model. That's kind of the industry standard energy model for larger buildings. Or those multifamily projects may use prescriptive measures in lieu of the energy model and blower door test for Energy Star. FEIS is always going to require you to do the blower door test, but Energy Star gives you some alternatives for larger multifamily projects. Now, on top of those building certifications for Energy Star, those building checks, there's some credentials that your team members are going to need to have. First up, your HVAC contractor. Your HVAC contractor must be credentialed by the Air Conditioning Contractors of America or Advanced Energy. Those two groups provide QA services for design and installation. Training and testing runs on the order of $1,500, give or take a little bit. And then there's also an annual fee to remain members of those groups. So there is a small fee that your contractor may be required to pay. And this is a credential that they will need to have in order for you to achieve Energy Star building certification. So we'll mention this again 2 or 3 times. This is a certification you want to have in your project requirements way up front before anything goes out to bid, because you do not want to surprise a contractor with a day-long training as they're trying to get your ductwork installed. Now, the general contractor also has some requirements, but they're a little less stringent. The general contractor must register as an Energy Star partner. This one just requires some free online training. It's a few hours in front of a computer, no fees, but the general contractor does need to take that training and sign the Energy Star partnership agreement. So again, something to include in the requirements up front for the project, just so nobody's complaining about doing a little bit of training later on. That's what we need to know about Energy Star. We'll go up another level and talk about EPA Indoor Air Plus. So EPA Indoor Air Plus requires Energy Star certification, which we've talked about, and it focuses on a few specific aspects of the home that FEIS would otherwise not look at in great detail. First is moisture control. Some of your regular passive house detailing is going to be just fine here, but Indoor Air Plus also looks at things like exterior grading, just to make sure you don't have additional water running towards the building. It also requires radon control in Zone 1. That covers most of the geographic area down here around Philly. It covers a lot of the New England and Northeast US as well. So if you're in a Zone 1 radon region, you do need to install at least passive radon measures. You don't necessarily need the active radon fan, but you'll need at least passive measures installed, and that's due to Indoor Air Plus. Requires things like pest screens over your building entrances. That's fine. Those aren't people you want gate crashing your passive house. And it also requires some HVAC requirements. Typically, a passive house project, nothing is going to be out of reach there. You're probably designing higher quality equipment than is required. And finally, low emitting materials. This is where occupant health gets a little bit of a bump. So we're concerned about what materials the contractor is bringing in to the interior of the project, just to make sure that we maintain a healthy environment. Now, most of these items, FEIS will allow the builder to certify. So there's a checklist that we'll hand off to the contractor and make sure that they comply with it. They'll sign off, and your FEIS rater or verifier will just make sure that all that documentation is in order. All right, and up to our top level, at last, the US Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home program. So Zero Energy Ready Homes requires Energy Star certification. It also requires EPA Indoor Air Plus certification. Practically speaking, what this means for your project is that you've got prescriptive R and U values for some building assemblies. Practically speaking, for most passive house projects, this isn't a huge concern. Again, your passive house details are probably going to be at or above those prescriptive levels anyway. It also requires your project to be PV ready. Angela will talk about the details of that in much more detail, but for now, know that that means you may be required to run conduit for a future PV system, make sure that you've got expansion space in your breaker box, and just get your project ready for a solar system, even if you're not installing it right away. And then finally, WaterSense. Now, if you've been paying close attention, you'll have noticed that WaterSense is not on our big master list of certifications you must pursue. That's because it's not required, but FEIS suggests compliance. And this one isn't all that difficult to achieve. Now, whether or not you actually do pursue WaterSense certification, we do recommend that you complete the WaterSense calculator, which is used to determine your maximum hot water run lengths for FEIS. Those absolutely will be checked as part of the verification process, and WaterSense has a great tool for checking that out. If you do pursue certification, it's mostly dependent on low flow fixtures. All right, so those are all the programs we're talking about. Let's review the credentials that you're going to need for a FEIS project. Your first option is a FEIS rater. You'll use a rater on single family homes and potentially on multi-family projects up to 5 stories. You'll use a FEIS verifier on duplexes and townhomes, multifamily units, and commercial buildings. A FEIS verifier may also do single family if they're a HERS rater. Your builder, your main contractor, will need to be an Energy Star partner. And your HVAC contractor will need to join an Energy Star approved quality assurance organization. So these are all the requirements that are not necessarily crystal clear from the FEIS documentation. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? The answer is really pretty straightforward. FEIS and DOE struck an agreement. FEIS was in need of some funding to put together the next round of updates a few years ago. DOE was in a position to provide some grant funding in exchange for driving users over to their programs. So they had a handshake agreement as well as a written agreement, I'm sure. FEIS got the funding and in exchange required all of these DOE and EPA programs of projects that get certified under FEIS. So that's how we got here. And now I'm going to turn the digital controls over to Angela to talk through the actual verification process and what to expect on that. Do we have you there, Angela?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. All right. Ball's in your court.
Sorry about that. Okay, so verification. So how does this actually work when we get boots on the ground, right? People are surprised sometimes when they hear about the different tasks required for verification. People just think, oh, we run a blower door test and that's it. But there are additional requirements, and a verifier needs to be involved throughout the construction process. So we'll kind of run through those requirements now. So the work of a verifier should start early on. Ideally, the verifier is involved in the design phase. As you can see from this timeline of verification, there are tasks scattered throughout a project's life. And a verifier's involvement will go through substantial completion once final testing is able to be completed for a project. I should note this timeline shows the minimum tasks required for verification. It's up to the project team to decide on a scope of work for the verifier. Some projects may want additional QA/QC, especially if it's a large or complicated building. It might also make more sense for a verifier to do additional visits if the design team can't make it out for regular CA visits, for example. So we'll go into more detail on these required tasks in just a minute, but before we do, we wanted to bring up another quick poll around the required tasks of verification. So I will give you guys just a minute to answer this. So the question is, which of these does not need to be verified in field for a FIAS single family project?
Angela, I'm going to break in for just a minute. It looks like we're having some trouble launching the poll in GoToWebinar for this one, so we won't collect the answers, but let's take a moment. We'll still walk through it.
Okay.
All right, so your options here, which of these does not need to be verified in field? Your options are slab insulation, your HVAC equipment power draw, the exhaust rate of your kitchen hood, your ventilation system sound levels, or your radon ventilation stack. We'll give you just another moment. Think of your correct answer. All right.
Good. Okay. So while acoustics and sound levels are important and definitely something the team should consider when designing systems, there are no actual acoustics metrics that need to be met for FIAS, but all of the other items do, and we will discuss those in more detail as we get farther along in this presentation. Okay, so as we've already explained, FIAS has some embedded requirements from other certification programs. This table shows the major verification tasks required by FIAS and also where these requirements come from. So as you can see, different requirements are pulled from Energy Star, Indoor Air Plus, as well as Zero Energy Ready Homes. So we're going to walk through each of these tasks and go over what to expect and also things to consider when you're preparing for a FIAS project. Similar for testing, you can see most of the testing requirements originate from Energy Star. The most familiar testing requirement to probably most of us is the blower door test. But there are a couple other things to look out for. For example, testing required for Zero Energy Ready homes. Sometimes these tests take designers by surprise, and again, we'll kind of walk through what each of these mean. Okay, so using the timeline of verification, let's start at the beginning. Once we know Passive House is a goal of the team. Okay, so for these early stage tasks, what to expect and things to consider. So for projects that are eligible for Energy Star, so single family and multifamily projects, 4 to 5 stories, an initial plan review and REM rate model needs to be completed for each dwelling unit within your project. This energy model is required for Energy Star certification, and it's also required for FIAS documentation. There are also 2 site visits that are required by FIAS. The first being a pre-slab site visit. This is needed because FIAS wants documentation of your sub-slab insulation and installation details. They want documentation, like the photo shown here, that the sub-slab insulation is installed per the plans and WUFI model. FIAS also wants at this stage the verifier to review and document general site sloping and drainage, in addition to indoor air plus requirements that need to be verified. So specifically, indoor air plus requires at least 4 inches of aggregate under the slab, and making sure that radon measures are installed where applicable. Okay, so again, for these are
We might have lost
early stage
Andrew.
tasks,
You're back.
what to expect and things to consider. So your verifier will have, sorry about that, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back. Thanks.
Hey, Nick, can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry about that. So I was, okay. So I was just saying, so your verifier is going to have to do a drawing review to call information for the HERS model. So you might as well involve them early, bring them on in design. And they can definitely bring to light things that the design team may not have considered or have left unclear in the project documents. You know, some designer considerations, like if you have a verifier within your firm, ask them to do a review with you. It should be noted that FIAS requires a letter of intent from the verifier prior to pre-certification. So you will at least need to have them on board whenever you do submit for pre-certification for FIAS. It's recommended that the designer review the verification requirements, especially around indoor air plus and PV ready in design with your verifier. We definitely don't want designers to be in a position where like you had no idea your project had to be PV ready and you go through design and you then realize you need to install additional conduit and infrastructure and potentially redesign your roof. Lastly, prior to construction, have a dedicated Passive House kickoff with your design team, your CPHC, verifier, and all of your subs to kind of walk through the process and requirements. Some things might be a little different for contractors, especially if they haven't worked on a Passive House project. And the last thing we want to see happen is a contractor say like, oh, this detail is complicated, I can do it an easier way. And then that subsequently messes up the whole air sealing strategy. We definitely don't want that. Okay, so next, so a few months go by and we're enclosed and we're ready for a pre-drywall inspection. So the second site visit that FIAS requires is a pre-drywall inspection. FIAS does want documentation of insulation installation, air sealing and air barrier details, as well as window information and some general installation information. FIAS also explicitly requires a whole building IR scan to identify areas of thermal bridging. Although it is not required, it is strongly recommended that a preliminary blower door test be completed at this stage. So in terms of what to expect for your pre-drywall inspection, your verifier will be on site anywhere from a few hours to a full day, depending on building size and complexity, to get through their install checks and thermal imaging scan of the building. Things to consider for designers, definitely recommend including preliminary testing in the project schedule and budget. This is really your last chance before things get covered up to troubleshoot and seal. Include contractor requirements in the specs. It's expected when a verifier finds issues that the contractor helps resolve them. So it might be a good idea to include something in the specs to outline roles and responsibilities. It also might be a good idea to have available on-site little cheat sheets for the contractors. So like examples of what a bad install looks like versus what a good install looks like, just to remind them of what to be cognizant of. Okay, so next, assuming you pass your preliminary blower door test and construction's going well, now you have your systems installed and operational. Okay, so in addition to blower door testing, we do have required MEP testing. So we do have balancing verification, where your verifier will measure the ventilation and heating and cooling airflows to make sure that they are meeting the design airflows. Please note that a verifier is not responsible for balancing systems on a project. Your mechanical contractor or third-party balancing contractor is responsible for doing that. The verifier is simply verifying that the systems are performing as they should. Duct leakage testing is applicable if you have ducted split systems for heating and cooling or similar that have ductwork greater than 10 feet in length. Bedroom pressure balancing is actually an ENERGY STAR requirement, and your verifier will confirm that bedrooms with doors closed don't have more than a 3 Pascal or 1 Pascal for ventilation pressure differential between or compared to adjacent areas. And there's also a hot water testing requirement that needs to be met, and I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so as far as air systems testing, what to expect. So your verifier will come in after equipment has been started up and is ready to run. Again, depending on building size and complexity, you're probably looking at your verifier being there a full day. And you also don't want anyone adjusting the systems while your verifier is on site. For some things, you may or may not need the support of an MEP contractor, so that's just something to be aware of as well. And then in terms of designer considerations, pre-drywall checks and testing, if you do have ductwork throughout your project, it might be a good idea to do some preliminary testing before that equipment gets enclosed behind walls or soffits. Make sure that your damper detailing is clear on your MEP plans. We definitely want to have that information clear to the contractors, because we don't necessarily want them devising their own damper plan. Also, check your MEP plans to see how your bedrooms and adjacent areas are designed for that bedroom balancing plan. So make sure you either have dedicated returns in your bedrooms, doors with sufficient undercuts, and or some other way to maintain balance, like transfer grills between those spaces, because that will get tested. Okay, so for hot water testing, this is one that tends to take some designers by surprise. So here we are concerned with measuring the hot water temperature at fixtures that have the highest volume of water between it and the water heater. So typically it's the farthest fixture from the water heater. So what happens here is your verifier will measure the hot water temperature at fixtures with the highest volume of water. they'll put a bucket under that fixture, and no more than 0.6 gallons is allowed to fill that bucket before the temperature increases by 10 degrees. There are a couple things designers should be aware of in the design phase to prepare for this testing. So number one, FEOS has a calculator available on their website. It's the EPA's WaterSense calculator for calculating volume in pipes, and it can help outline if a system will pass the in-field testing. It's not a guarantee, but obviously it will help. There's also a button that's built into WFI that says WaterSense met, and that's to estimate whether or not all fixtures will pass this hot water delivery requirement. So it's definitely recommended, you know, if a fixture is not complying in the model, that the designer or CPHC review the tap location or circulation strategy for your domestic hot water. Also, you know, install your piping and fixtures per the plans, keep runs short, stack kitchens and bathrooms, insulate your pipes. All of these things will help you meet this hot water delivery requirement. Okay, so then also we get into some installation checks that are required for FEOS. So as far as appliance and equipment checks, we do need to verify the installed MEP equipment and appliances match the scheduled equipment. We also need to verify at this point that your project is PV ready. So that kind of goes back to what Nick was saying, you know, making sure that there's the installation of conduit for future PV, as well as the roof conditions to support a future array if you don't have renewables on your project. Verifiers also have to measure the power draw from your ERV or HRV equipment. Or alternatively, you can have your electrical or mechanical contractor confirm this measurement, but this measurement does get included in the WFI model, so it's something that will need to be measured. You know, as far as designer things to consider, again, please review the Indoor Air Plus requirements for low emitting materials, IQ during construction, have a plan ready for PV. Hopefully that's the case before all of this. And another thing is include Energy Star and low VOC requirements in the specs for your project, so there are no surprises that come up during your project. Okay, so moving on to our air infiltration testing. Okay, so in terms of air infiltration testing, we do have our blower door testing, which is required, and then we also have our compartmentalization testing that's required if we are working on a multifamily project. So a couple options for hitting the air tightness requirement for blower door testing. For compartmentalization testing, sampling is okay. So if we're working on like a larger multifamily project, we're typically looking at testing like 1 in 7 units. And that's usually most appropriate for buildings with like 30 units plus or so. So, you know, while whole building blower door testing is concerned with air movement across the surface area of the envelope. We also can't completely ignore air movement between interior spaces because it is a requirement for FAS. Okay, so in terms of what to expect for this testing, you're probably, again, looking at one full day of testing depending on size and complexity. For example, for larger buildings, you might need multiple blower doors set up at multiple locations to get the building equally pressurized. You'll need to go through and make sure all interior doors are propped open, all windows are sealed shut. Ventilation systems will need to be taped off. So if a building has decentralized systems, it could take a long time to seal off each individual unit. Also, once the blower door test gets started, no one can move in and out of the building. So no contractors going in and out because that will ruin the whole test. Designer consideration. So special consideration needs to be given to what is included within your thermal boundary. So just be careful when you're including things like trash chutes, elevator doors, fireplaces within your thermal boundary because they can be particularly leaky. Door frame detailing. Yeah, so that's something that we definitely will encounter on projects. It will be tricky to set up the blower door frame depending on the door detailing on some projects. Are you going to necessarily change the door detailing on your project? Probably not, but it's just something to note because we'll need additional time to set that up and or like taping off of those areas to make sure we get a good seal and a good accurate blower door test result. Be sure to include sufficient air sealing details in your drawings. Don't leave out details around elevators or parapets, etc., because we don't necessarily want contractors deciding how to air seal. Unplanned assembly penetration. You know, something like sometimes things happen or change and perhaps an additional penetration needs to be added during construction. That's fine, but please be careful of these changes as obviously every penetration through the assembly will contribute to air leakage. Also, join in the testing. So when your verifier is on site doing this testing, it's a great opportunity to get out there. I personally love a good leak chasing party. So it's really fun to like have that experience and also learn from it. So definitely get out there if you can. Okay. And then after all that final testing, hopefully we've passed everything. Your rater will compile all information that is required for FAS, and then we will have a party because we passed. I'll turn it back to Nick to just go over some general takeaways for verification.
Great, thanks.
Before Nick gets started, if anyone has questions, feel free to type them into the questions section, and we will do a Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Beverly. All right, so we will take just a minute or two to wrap up here, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So the big takeaways from today, number one, include all of the requirements in your specifications, be that the certifications that you're pursuing, any of the details that contractors need to know about, any participation you're going to need from the contractor for all of those other certifications in addition to FEAS. Make sure that those are upfront and in the specifications. Engage a rater or verifier as early as you can during the design process. If anything in the presentation today was new information to you or caught you off guard, those are the things that a rater or verifier help make sure the project is lined up to achieve. You're going to be paying for a rater or verifier anyway, so if you can do that just a little bit earlier, you'll get a lot more bang for your buck. Again, I want to note that these were all FEIS requirements, not PHI requirements. So if you're pursuing certification under PHI, be aware that there will be some differences there. Determine which certifications for people are required prior to bidding. Again, make sure your HVAC contractor needs to know if they're going to need some additional credentialing on their personnel. And finally, if you can help it, do the preliminary blower door tests. They are not required by FEIS, but they're a great idea to help solve problems while it is still cheap and easy to do so. Last position you want to be in is ripping out drywall, trying to figure out where a leak is somewhere behind the insulation. And finally, just a reminder of which certification systems are going to be necessary. For smaller residential projects up to 5-story multifamily, you'll need FEIS, Energy Star, Indoor Air Plus, and Zero Energy Ready Homes. For 5-story multifamily with centralized systems, or for 6 stories or up, you'll need FEIS and Indoor Air Plus, and commercial projects require FEIS and Indoor Air Plus. So, we hope we've given you the information you need to be a little more confident in your delivery of a passive house project, and we would be more than happy to take your questions. A very big thank you to Beverly and the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center for having us today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you and happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point. Oh, I should also mention, when these slides get distributed, we do have some resource slides at the end with some handy links to many of the programs and the certifications that you need to know about. So when these slides go out, you'll have these links available to you as well.
Great. It looks like we have a few questions. So first, what role does a HERS model play if a WUFI model is also done? Is it just to meet Energy Star requirements?
Yes, the HERS model is required to comply with the Energy Star certification. So you're correct, it is an additional energy model if you're also doing WUFI, but it's just something that's got to get done for Energy Star.
And there was a question about what is a pre-fenestration blower door test?
Angela, you want to talk about that one?
No, go ahead, Nick.
Okay, so a pre-fenestration blower door test is before we've got the doors and the windows in the building, we set up a blower door and try to find the leaks. Now, if it feels to you like there will be some very large leaks where we don't yet have windows, that would be very true. Typically what we do is cover up those penetrations with plywood, just seal up those bits so that we can test everything else. We basically want to test as much of the envelope as we can, exclusive of the fenestration. That way we know if we've got to chase leaks there. You know, depending on the project schedule, that can also happen after the fenestration is in, but before the drywall is up. That's not a bad time to do a blower door test as well.
So this one's a hard one. What is the average additional cost for passive house development? So I can take a stab at that one in Massachusetts. I think you guys are in Pennsylvania, so it may be a little different, although I believe a lot of the multifamily affordable has come in under 2%, right? Is that correct? Additional cost between 0 and 2, incremental cost above what would have been?
You know, I'm gonna say that that does not sound unreasonable, but we're on the verification side at the end, so whole project costing is admittedly a little bit out of our wheelhouse. So I'm a little hesitant to speak confidently about that.
So in Massachusetts, we don't have quite as many built projects as they do in Pennsylvania. There is one, so the Passive House Design Challenge projects, which are all affordable projects, and there are 8 of those either starting soon or underway, and one is just completed. So the webinar that's next week on Cambridge Finch we do have incremental costs. That one came in above stretch code, well, above their base building that they were planning on. It is a 1.4% incremental cost increase. That is probably a little deceptive because the architect was sort of coming in with I would call it a stealth passive project before they decided to actually certify. In particular, I think insulation levels and especially shading features were included that you wouldn't see in a normal stretch code community. However, if you are building something, and then actually the other thing that we know is the Mattapan project, which is just about to break ground, it's 135 units. That first one was 98 units. The construction contract has been signed, and it's less than a 2% premium from the building they were planning to build before. So that's without change orders yet, but it's encouraging to see that number. And what I will say is communities that really push for good building envelopes. So in Boston, you have to do a LEED certifiable, and they really push the energy points usually for you, as well as Cambridge, and now Newton has a similar requirement. That base building is going to be a higher entry level, so the incremental cost to get to passive is not going to be that high. Also, the Finch project, their biggest construction cost increase was around ventilation, bringing fresh air to every bedroom and balanced ventilation, which FIAS requires. Code in Massachusetts, as of August, will require something similar. So there's still going to be a little difference in the common areas between FIAS and what code will require, but that's an incremental cost that basically will go away because code is getting better. So it's hard to say. I think if you go and talk to an environmental consultant, they'll say it depends. The more simple the building is, the less expensive. The more experienced the team is in Passive House, the less expensive. And we definitely think that there's a learning curve here. The earlier projects may have higher costs, and over time, we think that's going to come down a lot. I would recommend Passive House Mass has a great recording called Cost Estimating for Passive House, and it is about that Mattapan project. And Delbrook, their cost estimator for the construction company, talked about how when they started first talking about passive, the numbers went way high when they talked to their subs. And their certified Passive House consultants, Building Evolution, came in and sort of educated the subs on what it really meant, so it didn't sound so scary to them, and also so that they would understand what kind of support they would get, that they weren't just throwing a requirement over the fence and it's your job then to figure it out, that they were going to have all the support through the certified Passive House consultant and the verifier and rater.
Right.
And those costs came way down, and that's why they were able to do less than 2%. I recommend that highly. It's actually fun. They play a game higher or lower. They look at the original details that change, and they ask the crowd, do you think it's more expensive or less expensive? And then Delbrook tells you what it came in at, and sort of there are some surprises in there.
Yeah, and I would definitely second everything that Bev just said. I mean, it's so dependent upon the project, but I would definitely agree that because code is getting so much better, we kind of have to keep up with these things. I do also think the presentation with David Solomon on June 16th could probably maybe kind of speak more specifically to a lot of the these questions. So I would definitely stay tuned for that as well.
And there's a question about when certifications are not required. Are not checklists from those programs still required?
The answer is they can be, yeah. Sometimes you don't need to pursue the full certification, but their checklists might still need to be completed. I think Angela tried to cover, or did cover, some of that in the required verification tasks side. So, you can see what's required by FIAS anyway, and then the program that it comes from. So yes, it definitely can be the case where even if you're not pursuing the certification, you've still got to demonstrate compliance with some of the requirements.
And then there were some questions about AIA and GBCI continuing it. I don't believe this was approved for AIA, right? It is for FIAS, and my understanding is you can self-report something like this for LEED, right? I've done that before.
LEED does have a self-reporting feature for credits. I can't say that I know off the top of my head what the thresholds are for being able to take advantage of that, unfortunately.
Right. And for this presentation, we didn't apply specifically for AIA credits, but we did apply for the continuing education credits through FIAS. Those slides were shown at the beginning by Nick. So it is 2.5 hours for this webinar, as well as the webinar that is being hosted in June. So if you do attend that webinar, you can pick up 2.5, there we go, continuing education credits, and you'll get the code there to self-report for FIAS.
So looks like we're pretty much out of questions, which is impressive. Usually it's so overwhelmed, it's crazy. But I just want to thank everybody for showing up. And if you like this kind of thing, definitely check out Passive House Massachusetts' video library. There's a lot of great stuff there. This will be there very soon. And pass it on to any colleagues you have that would find this useful. Thank you. And thanks, Angela and Nick.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I do see somebody asked a question about if the slides will be available. I believe Bev is working on a way to get those out to everyone. So expect to see those. If you have trouble with them, please reach out to us and we're happy to help as well. But I think Bev will be on the front lines there.
Great. Yes, and the recording should be there in the next couple of days on the Passive House Mass website. Thank you, everyone.